We're starting here, Tzadik K Amud Aleph on the bottom, by the Mishnah. By the Mishnah, it's discussing a new malach already. Now, till now we spoke about carrying on Shabbos, removing from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, and now we're going to talk about. Actually, no, we spoke about a few other malachas already. I'm machlokes about it, about removing hair, removing nails. Fine. So now we're talking about the malacha of koitzer, of detaching from the ground. Now, what if you detach from a flower pot? You have earth in a flower pot and you have a plant growing there. Is that detaching? So, mid Rabbanan, you're not allowed to detach. But mid Deraisa, it depends if it's connected to the actual ground. If it's connected to the actual ground, then it's considered detaching. If it's not connected to the ground, it's connected to the earth in the flower pot, then it's not considered detaching, mina Torah. However, if there's a hole on the bottom of the flower pot, and therefore it takes nutrients from the ground, therefore it's considered connected. And then mina Torah, you're not allowed to detach this plant from the flower pot. Now, this same rule applies to many other halachas regarding Truma and Meiser, regarding many things. So one of the things we're going to talk about now is regarding Hechsher Zroim. The rule is that anything that grows can only become tummy if first one of the 7 liquids, the 7 mashkim, either water, yad shochadam, wine, blood, oil, milk, dew, honey, and water. If any of these 7 things touched the fruit or the plant after it was detached from the ground, and then afterwards a tumah touched it, only then it becomes tummy. That's called hechsher zroim, enabling plants to become tummy. However, if there was no liquid on it once it was detached, then it cannot become tummy. Now, what if the plant is in the flower pot? Is it considered attached or detached? If water falls on this plant in the flower pot, can it become tummy or can it not become tummy? So it will depend on the same rule. If it has a hole, then it cannot become tummy. It's still connected to the ground. If it doesn't have a hole, then it could become tummy. So let's see inside the Mishnah. 1 second. Let's see inside the Mishnah. It's 4 lines on the bottom and Tzadik K Amud Aleph. Hatoilish want to detach it mi'otzitz nakuv, from a flower pot which has a hole. Chayiv. It's a isumi deraisa because it's considered connected to the ground. V'she'eni nakuv, but if it does not have a hole, then potter, because minat Torah it's considered detached. Rabbi Shimon poiter bozel bozel. Rabbi Shimon says no, just because it has a hole, it's connected to the ground. No, it's not connected to the ground, so it's not connected to the ground. So that's why it's always potter. Fine. Says the Gemara. Romile Abaye leRava. Abaye asked Rava a contradiction between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Shimon. V'amri, some say it wasn't Abaye to Rava. It was Rabbi Chia bar Rav leRav. Rav's son, Rabbi Chia, asked his father Rav. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon poiter bozeh ubozeh, that he says whether it has a hole, whether or not. You're potter on Shabbos. Alma, so we see. Nakuv, if it has a hole, Rabbi Shimon. Kisha Eini Nakuv is the same as if it would not have a hole. Mashvilei, he considers it as if it would not have a hole. Veraminu, we have a contradiction to this. Rabbi Shimon Oimer, there's no difference between having a hole or not. Only regarding water falling on plants and making it eligible to become tummy, which for that it has to be detached from the ground. So then Rabbi Shimon says if it has a hole, it's still considered attached, and therefore it does not become eligible to mikabel tumah, although water fell on it. it's considered connected enough that it should not be Mekabel Tumah. The water does not help to make it Mekabel Tumah. Now, it's interesting why the Gemara is saying that it's a contradiction. Didn't the Braisa itself say, Rabbi Shimon says, there is no difference besides getting plants ready to become tummy? So your question could be, why is there a difference? But there's no contradiction. Rabbi Shimon clearly said, everywhere else not, and Behechsher is right yet. So like this, one second. One second. One second. Yeah. So the answer is like this. The Gemara understood like this. How could it be? How could it be that on Shabbos you're allowed to detach a plant from a holy flower pot, and nevertheless, if water fell on it, it does not become tummy? It doesn't make sense. Usually, all these differences would be like this. Rabbanan made a gzeira, but by certain cases they didn't make a gzeira. So the Gemara understood like this. Rabbi Shimon is saying, Chachamim considered a flower pot with a hole as if it's detached wherever it's necessary. For example, maybe that you have to take truma because it's considered already detached. You can't consider as if, I don't know what, as if it's connected to the ground. Wherever there's any chumrah in being detached, Chachamim were goyzer that it should be detached. Besides, regarding to make it eligible for tumah. But here we're talking about Shabbos. And you're saying that you're Minat Torah, you're allowed to detach it. So you're telling me that Minat Torah is detached. That's a contradiction to what we say over here. In other words, the Gemara did not assume that there'll be a difference in any halacha of Torah, that in one case it'll be considered attached, one case will be considered detached. It only makes sense between the Rabbanan and Minat Torah. But here we see the Minat Torah is considered detached. You're potter. Now that's a contradiction. That was the question of the Gemara. You're telling me that on Shabbos, if I detach something from a holy flower pot, then I'm potter. It's not considered attached. In this Braisa, you're telling me that Minat Torah it's considered detached the kula. It's considered attached the kula. It's considered attached that it does not become eligible to become tummy. Answers, whoever answered, either Rava or Rav, answered and said, no. It's no contradiction. Minat Torah, it's considered detached, but regarding Hechsher Zroim, it's considered attached to the Kula, Minat Torah. The Torah itself differentiates. How? Amarli answered back, whoever answered, either Rav or Rava. The call mili for all halachis, Rabbi Shimon Ketolish Mashvili, Rabbi Shimon considered it as if it was detached. Vishani linyan tumah. Torah ripsa tara itzel zroim. Torah said that plants are very, very Torah. In other words, the Torah specified very much how a plant can become tummy, which makes it only in very particular cases, excluding a lot. And therefore it excludes even a holy flower pot. Shenera, it says, Al kol zera zerua asher yizoreya. If water fell on a planting plant that you would, on a planting seed that you would plant. Well, you couldn't say it a bit shorter? On a seed, on a fruit, on a vegetable, on a seed, a planting seed that you would plant. You couldn't find any more words? So obviously the Torah is saying, only if the seed is prepared to plant, which basically means it's not attached to anything, not attached to a pot. Okay, so if it's a detached pot, fine, so it's totally detached. But if it has some connection to the ground, then it's not a planting seed that you're going to plant, right? It's not so detached. The Torah is adding extra words to say it has to be super detached. And since the Torah says it has to be super detached, therefore, we're much more makel in that halacha than in any other halacha. As it says, and any plant that you would plant, it has to be totally detached, and therefore only here, even if it's a bit connected with a hole in the pot, we consider it connected, although it's to make it more lenient. Fine. Okay. An old man asked Rabbi Zena, when Reb Shimon says that a hole in the pot doesn't help anything, what if the hole was exactly right under the root? Usually the root is somewhere, and the hole is somewhere, and the nutrients go from the ground to the earth and the pot to the plant. But if the plant's root is directly on the hole, so it can't be more connected to the ground than that. Okay, it's not in the ground, but it's like, directly on top of the ground. Does Reb Shimon agree that then also does he agree that then it's considered attached, or does he still stick with his opinion that it's considered detached? So he said, 1 second, Ishtik, he was quiet. I don't know. But the Yom he didn't tell him anything. One time, Ashkechei, this old man, found Reb Zera. The Yossi Omar, he was sitting down and teaching his students. Umay the Reb Shimon agrees. If the flower pot had a hole, that would make it tahor. What does that mean? So we'll see soon. There's different levels. Whenever a vessel has a hole that it cannot hold something, it makes it tummy, but it depends what the vessel was designated for. If the vessel was designated for food, then the typical size for food is olives, like a kazayas. And therefore, if it has a hole the size of an olive, so the minimum size of food would fall out of the vessel, so the vessel is useless, so it's not mekabel tum. That's like the typical thing. You have a vessel, typically it's for food, and food typically is meant to hold olive-sized food. So if the size of an olive can fall out, it's not mekabel tum. So if this flower pot had a hole the size of an olive, then it's not then whatever's in it is considered attached. So he says, 1 second. I don't get you what I'm saying. I'm related like this. I once upon a time asked you a question. If the root is directly on top of the hole, does Reb Shimon agree that it's connected? He didn't answer. He didn't know the answer. Now, if it has a hole the size of an olive, but if it's not right under the root, so you're going to tell me it has a hole, it's a large hole, so it's connected. A small hole right under the root is much more useful than a large hole on the side. So how can you be sure that the size of an olive is connected and a hole right under the root, you're not sure? Both of them you shouldn't be sure. Or the other way around, both of them you should be sure. End of conversation. It seems like that what he said was accepted to say, if you want to say his halacha, you have to say it like this. This hole has to be below the place in the vessel which could hold a revis. If it's anywhere higher than that, then it doesn't disqualify the vessel, and therefore it's considered still detached. In order to be attached, it has to be so low that there's no revis below. Fine. So that was the story of Rabbi Zera. So since we're learning Gemara, and we spoke about a hole in a vessel, so we're now going to talk about the laws of a hole in a vessel when it makes it tahor. Total different subject. Okay. There are 5 measurements, 5 measurements in earthenware utensils, in earthenware vessels. What size of a hole would make it invalid and therefore not mekabel tumah? Depends what it's meant for. Okay, so the smallest size is like this. Nikav kemoitzi mashke. if it has a hole that water drips out. Now, even if it's a vessel made for liquids, in those days they would still keep it. They weren't in a throwaway society. If it still could just, slowly drip out, okay, it'll take a long time, one drip, an hour. It still will hold the most of it. We'll still keep it. We're not throwing it away yet. Yeah. The only time they would throw away a vessel which had a hole that would drip out some water is if it was a broken piece of earthenware that was used to put under a cracked vessel to catch the drips. Now, if that is a crack, that's totally useless. Because if it can't catch the drips, what do I have it for? It can't do anything but catch the drip. So if it has a hole and it's dripping, I'll throw it away. There's nothing to do with it. So that's called a gistera. So again, nikav kemoitzi mashkif. The hole is the size of dripping out liquids. Tor militame gistera. If it was only a base to catch the drip of a cracked vessel, then it's tar because it can't do anything anymore. But vadainu kli, it's a vessel for liquids to the extent lekanish boy mechatos. If you have to hold the water for the para aduma ashes, it has to be in a keli. It's a clear pasuk. It has to be in a keli. Yes, this is a keli even for that. It has to be a proper keli. It has to be like a keli chai, a fresh keli. Yeah, fine. A fresh keli that got a crack and it's dripping. Fine. It still works. It's still kosher even for the water of the para aduma. However, nikev kekoinis mashke. If it has a hole the size that if you put this vessel from outside on top of a larger bucket of water and you press it down, the water will seep in. Which that means that the other way around, when it's dripping out, it's already not just dripping out, but it's already pouring out. Or at least consistently dripping out. Then even in those days they would throw it away, they'd say, no, it's useless. Right? So nikev kekoinis mashke, if you would push it down on water and water would seep in, then tor milakadosh by mechatos. It's tor if it's meant for liquids. It's tor, and therefore you cannot use it for para aduma. The lashon tor milakadosh mechatos is an interesting lashon. It means to say it's invalid to use it for putting the para aduma ashes into it. Okay, but vadayin kliu lahachshir boizroim. This is according to Rabbanan, which say that a holy flower pot is considered connected to the ground, but if the size of the hole is only enough that you would push it on top of water and water would seep in, it's not large enough. It doesn't yet absorb from the ground. It has to be larger than that. What is it? Nikif kishoyrish cotton. If it has the hole the size of the smallest type of root, then Torah milahachshir b'izroim. If a plant was in that pot and water fell in it, it does not make it eligible to receive tumah because it's still considered connected to the ground according to Rabbanan. But vadayin kliu lekabel boy zeisim. It's still considered a vessel if this vessel was designated for food, which the typical size for food in halacha is olives. Then it still could hold olive-sized foods, and therefore it's still tummy. It's still makabel tumah. But okay, yeah. Now nikav kemoitzi zeisim. What if there's a hole the size of olives? Olives could fall out. Torin milakabel b'zeisim. Then if it's designated for food, it's tor. It's not mikabel tumah. But vadayin kliu lekabel b'rimonim. If it was designated for pomegranates, then it's still mikabel tumah because it's in 1 second. Because whatever was designated for, it's still useful. It could still hold pomegranates. It can't hold olives. It could hold pomegranates. Now, nikav kemoitzi rimonim. If pomegranates can fall out also, so then torim miklum. The size for that is a tefach because it has to be like 3 pomegranates piled together. And nevertheless, one of them will push out through the hole. So it has to be a bit larger than a pomegranate. So around tefach and tefach, that would be the size that it's called moitzi ribonim, that makes it Torah from everything. Fine? Okay. However, vimhu kat somit posem. We mentioned this earlier, that if you have a vessel, a earthenware vessel, in a house where there's a dead body, and whatever's in the house becomes tummy because it's an oil mace. However, this vessel is sealed. So then whatever's inside is tar. But if it's not a vessel, if it's just a scrap of something, and I put things inside and I sealed it, it doesn't help. It has to be a vessel. However, the lashon of the Torah is kli pasuach. It has to be a vessel with an opening. Now, this is not yet considered an opening. It's considered a hole. So if I put food inside and I sealed it, although it's useless, but it doesn't have an opening. It has a hole. And therefore it does save all the food inside, even though the hole is so large. So he says, if it was in the oil amaze and it was covered and sealed, it's tar until the majority of the size of the circumference, the whatever it is, the majority of the circumference of this vessel was broken. Then it's not a keli anymore. It has an opening, not just a hole, and therefore it does not serve as a protector from tumas oil. Okay. Amar Avasi, 1 second, I'm confused. Shamaiti, I heard from elsewhere a different rule. Klei cheres shiuri kamay tzirimoy. I heard something interesting. The rule goes like this. A earthenware keli, what makes it tar is if it has the hole the size of a rimon. That's in a very unique case. If I designated it for pomegranates, then the whole of a pomegranate makes it tar. How do you say such a rule? Based on what you said, Rabbi, that's what I'm saying. What you said confuses me. You're giving me so many different rules, and I heard no, the rule is the whole the size of a pomegranate. That's only one case. Why did I hear such a rule? Can you explain it to me? So he says, Amalei Rabbi, no, I'll explain to you. Maybe you heard this rule about when it's in the oil and mace, and there was something inside, and it was sealed on the top. So until it has the hole the size of a pomegranate, then it could save whatever's inside. When it has the hole the size of a pomegranate, then it cannot say what's inside. That was Rabbi's solution. 1 second. Rabbi just gave a beautiful rule. 5 rules. Rabbi asked him a question, and Rabbi gives him a simple answer. And us simple people, or not us simple people, even the Gemara, is looking over these notes of that conversation saying, I don't get you, Rabbi. You just told me that in the oil and mace, a moitzurim does not disqualify from saving. Why? Because as long as the majority was not broken, it still saves. Comes Rav Asya and asks you, hey, I heard the size of a pomegranate. Where is that? You tell him in oil and mace, somit possible. You're contradicting yourself. What's going on over here? Rabbi is the one who said that only if the majority was broken, only then it's disqualified from saving things in oil and mace. So how did Rabbi say that? It's really kashya. Large kalim. So then, 1 second. One second. So he says, it depends if it's a large vessel or a small vessel. Says Rashi, in a large vessel, it has to be that the majority is broken because the size of a pomegranate is not so significant. However, in a small vessel, then the size of a ribbon already makes it disqualified. Asks Tosfos, I'm still confused. Because what size is a large one? And what size is a small one? You go to different countries, they're small, they're large, they're medium, it's very different. Yeah. The small, American small, is usually the size of the English extra large. So how do I know what's small and what's large? Says Tosfos the opposite. really the size is the size of a pomegranate. When Rava said that it has to be that the majority is broken, he's talking about a small vessel. A small vessel where a pomegranate is more than the majority. So even if it's less than a pomegranate, but it's the majority, it's already not eligible to save anything inside. However, by a larger vessel, once it reaches the size of a pomegranate, then it's already not eligible to save anything. So when the Gemara said earlier that it's still the majority is broken, it's not taking it out of the rule of Moitzi Rimoin, it's taking it out of the rule of Zaysin. How will we still have 5? Let me see, it's Moitzi Mashke, Koines Mashke, Shoirish Koton, is Moitzi Zaysin, and Moitzi Rimoin. It fits very well. Because the Rabbi's statement starts off saying there are 5 measurements, and all of a sudden he gives 6, according to Rashi. The 6th one is that the majority is broken. So the Tosha says, no, it's not a 6th. He's just telling you a rule. For it's Summit Posil, even if it has the size of an olive, when it's disqualified, when it's designated for food, it still can save the food, whatever is inside from becoming tamei, unless the whole is either the majority of it if it's a small vessel, or the size of a pomegranate in a larger vessel. That's Tosha's explanation. How will Rashi explain the fact that it's 5 when the Chayv is saying 6? That's another question. You could say it's like this. Really, the idea of a tzomit pasul is not another measurement. It's a total different rule. The rule is it has to be a pesach, not a whole. So it's not like one of the 5 measurements. It's like another rule. Okay, fine. Okay, so what are we learning over here? Reb Shimon said that on Shabbos, the Tanakhama said that on Shabbos, if you take a plant out of a flower pot, you detach it from a flower pot, if it had no hole, you're potter, then it had a hole, you're chayim. Says Reb Shimon, you're both potter, because they're both considered detached even if it has a hole. But then a Braisa says that regarding hechsher zroim, that if water falls on a plant when it's detached, it can become tummy. Says Reb Shimon, if it has a hole, it's still considered attached and it does not become tummy. How could you make it? There's a special pasuk. The pasuk, when it says that water falls on plants and it could make it become tummy, it specifies if it's so detached that you would plant it. It has to be like really, really detached. So if it's slightly attached, it's already not mekabel tum. Then we had another question. What if the root is directly across the hole? Does Reb Shimon agree that it's considered attached for all halachas? Reb Zera didn't know an answer. But later on he said that if it has the hole which would make the vessel not mekabel tuma, which is the size of an olive, then it is considered attached. Said the old man that asked him the first question, 1 second, it doesn't make sense. It makes much more sense that it's attached when the root is right across the hole than to say that there's a large hole, but on the side, to say, oh, it has a hole and makes it torn. But says Abaya, the hole only makes it torn if it's low enough in the vessel that there's nothing left in the vessel to be a vessel. There has to be that below the hole, whatever's left cannot hold a revius. If whatever's below the hole can hold a revius, then so what if the top is disqualified? The bottom is still good. Once we spoke about holes and vessels, we started speaking about tuma. That by tuma, different sizes of holes make different vessels, no vessel anymore. So if the hole is the size of dripping some liquids, it only disqualifies a drip catcher. You would have broken vessels would be drip catchers. Broken vessels will be drip catchers. 1 second. If it had a liquid that would, if you press it on water, liquid would come in, then it disqualifies a vessel designated for liquid. If it's the size of a small root, then a plant planted in it is considered connected to the ground. If it has the size of an olive, then if it's a vessel designated for food, then it doesn't become tummy. If it has the size of a pomegranate, then even if it was designated for pomegranates, it also doesn't become tummy. And that's for any larger food, it's totally disqualified. And then he says that if it's in an oil hameis, that a sealed keli would save anything inside, as long as the majority was not broken, it can still save the things in that vessel. It can still save the things in that vessel. So then Rav Asi said, but I heard that the rule is that pomegranates is that's talking about oil hameis. What does that mean? So the Gemara says it depends if it's a large vessel or a small vessel. Says Rashi, a small vessel, then the size of a pomegranate makes it disqualified. A large vessel, the majority makes it disqualified to save things in oil hameis when it's sealed. Tosfos is the exact opposite. A small vessel that a pomegranate is more than the majority already disqualifies it. A large vessel, then that the pomegranate is less than the majority, then the pomegranate already disqualifies it. It does not save anything inside.